Dan Burton's life is falling apart. Once, he dreamed of becoming a respected film director. But now, instead of making movies, he's directing cheap commercials. After the shoot wraps, he walks up to one of his co-workers and casually tells her that he and his wife are heading to their cabin for the weekend. She does not understand why he is sharing all this, but Dan keeps talking. He says Lisa wants to go hiking alone in the mountains. On top of that, a snowstorm might hit the area, and he is clearly worried about it. Then, without saying much else, he suddenly leaves. He gets into his car and receives a phone call. On the other end, a man asks if tomorrow's plan is still on. Dan confirms it, while also carrying some suspicious items with him. The man even asks if they can take the boat out after everything is done. Later, Dan meets his father, Michael, who is living in a care facility, and tells him about their weekend plans. Meanwhile, a news report plays on the television about two dangerous serial killers who have escaped from prison, along with a federal officer. Dan explains that he wants to take Lisa away, so they can relax and spend some time together. Michael, however, has a much darker outlook on life. The old man, a bitter war veteran, never misses a chance to humiliate Dan, even saying he wishes his son had gone to war so he could finally become a real man. When Dan gets home, Lisa is already there, and the mood turns strange immediately. A woman greets him with happy hunting, and Dan loudly calls out for Lisa, joking about their hiking trip. Lisa looks completely lost and asks what he is talking about. On the drive to the cabin, the couple starts fighting almost right away. Lisa is an actress, Dan is a director, and both of them tear into each other's careers. She mocks him for directing one movie nearly 8 years ago, and then spending the rest of his life making cheap online ads and pop-up commercials. Dan argues that those advertisements are the only reason they have been able to pay their bills. Since Lisa struggles to find steady work as a theater actress, his commercial projects are what have kept them afloat financially. Eventually, they stop arguing long enough to pretend everything is fine for the weekend. When they reach the cabin, the key is already sitting right above the door, like someone expected them. Inside, they unpack and settle in. But Dan soon notices a shotgun hidden in the basement. Later, while cooking dinner, he asks Lisa if she has seen his blue sweater. Dan kitchen to cook dinner. Small question turns into another argument, this time over how to chop garlic. He says he is trying to make the dinner special for her, but Lisa snaps back that if he really wants things to be nice, then maybe he should start acting nicer himself. The bitterness between them is impossible to hide now. Later, they sit down for dinner, and Dan says he ordered the meat specially just for her. Lisa looks confused and tells him that steak is not even her favorite dish. Fish is. Dan immediately suspects she is messing with him because he has never seen her order fish at a restaurant. Lisa replies that the South Americans make it best. Then Dan suddenly brings up Dario, Lisa's character from her class. Lisa says he is good and that they are working on a project together that night. They try to play Scrabble, but even that turns into a battlefield. Dan keeps winning by using memorized 2-letter words, which only frustrates Lisa more. Eventually, she gets fed up, quits the game, and goes to bed. Dan wakes up the next morning. He gathers heavy rocks and stuffs them into a bag. Then he takes it down to the boat and hides it there, as if he is already preparing a grave for his wife. He goes back to his car and removes the rest of the strange supplies he brought with him. He carries them into the basement and hides them away.
Nervous and terrified, Dan hesitates for a moment before taking a drink to calm himself. He soaks a clo with the chloroform and quietly approaches Lisa from behind while she continues rehearsing. But before he can do anything, Lisa shocks him with a taser. When Dan wakes up, he is tied to a chair. Lisa has already found the chloroform and the rest of his supplies. Dan desperately claims the chloroform is only for cleaning, but Lisa isn't buying it. After leaving him alone for a moment, Lisa returns carrying a shotgun. At gunpoint, she forces him to tell the truth. Eventually, Dan admits that he planned to kill her and dispose of her body in the lake. The only thing she doesn't understand is why he needed the saw. Dan finally confesses. He explains that bodies eventually float to the surface, so he planned to cut her body apart before disposing of it. Lisa is horrified. She points out that nobody would believe his story that she simply went hiking and never returned. Then she demands to know why he wanted her dead. Dan knows about her affair hooking up with Dario, but she fires back. She reminds him that he has shown her no love for years, while Dan accuses her of constantly criticizing and belittling him. Their argument quickly turns into a brutal exchange of insults. She calls him an immature man-child who throws endless temper tantrums. She says her own plan is nearly perfect. The day before, she invited a friend over and mentioned that Dan planned to go hunting while she stayed behind at the cabin because she hated guns. At that moment, Henry arrives and silently stares at Lisa, making the situation even more unsettling. Lisa tells her friend that Henry used to be friends with Dan, and since he lost his job, they have been helping him with petty work. Lisa's story was Dan about going hunting, but she didn't want to join. The safety was off on a gun which caused it to misfire, and that's how he died. Dan points out that her plan is just as cruel as his. Lisa replies that he tried to murder her first. Dan argues that at least his plan involved knocking her unconscious first, so she wouldn't feel any pain. He then mocks her acting skills, saying the police would never believe her story because she is a terrible actress. The argument quickly turns into a bizarre acting competition. Both of them perform emotional scenes to prove who is the better actor. Dan wins when he manages to shed a real tear, leaving Lisa furious. She smashes the gun into his face, breaking his nose, and prepares to kill him. Before she can pull the trigger, Henry suddenly appears. After several attempts by Dan to get his attention, Henry finally understands and strikes Lisa with a hammer, knocking her unconscious. A flashback reveals that 5 days earlier, Dan and Henry had planned the murder together. Dan promised Henry half of Lisa's $100,000 life insurance payout in exchange for helping dispose of her body. Back in the present, Henry ties Lisa to a chair. When she easily breaks free from the tape, he restrains her again more securely. Dan then asks why she wanted him dead. Lisa bluntly replies that he is weak, insecure, and controlling. She says he convinced her to quit her job to pursue acting, but never helped her career afterward. Lisa tells Dan that he is the reason they are drowning in debt after gambling away their car and house. Henry accidentally reveals that the murder was really about insurance money, not Lisa's affair. He proudly admits that Dan promised him half of the payout, which is $50,000. Before Lisa can say more, Dan pulls a plastic bag over her head and tries to suffocate her. However, Henry suddenly points a gun at Dan, forces him to let her go. Once free, Lisa reveals that the insurance policy is actually worth $1 million. She offers Henry half the money if he kills Dan, while Dan desperately tries to offer her with promises of cash and property. The argument turns into a violent struggle. Dan attacks Henry, Lisa frees herself, the gun falls on the ground, both of them grab it together, and the gun goes off during the fight. The accidental shot kills Henry instantly. Dan and Lisa immediately start blaming each other for his death. Lisa disarms Dan and runs upstairs, but he chases after her. They continue fighting throughout the cabin. Dan discovers the gun is empty, so he uses it as a club instead. Lisa stabs him in the leg, but neither is willing to give up. Their battle reaches the bedroom, where another accidental gunshot blasts into the ceiling. Suddenly, screams come from above, and 3 people crash through the attic floor onto the couple. The couple lies there unconscious. It's none other than the 3 fugitives, Pete, Todd, and Allie. A flashback reveals that 3 days earlier, they escaped prison and secretly took shelter in the cabin. They found a key, moved in unnoticed. Hey, we're settling in when suddenly the couple showed up. Todd says that they should kill them, but Pete says that it will attract more eyes. While hiding, they watched the couple's constant arguments and even witnessed Henry's arrival. During the bedroom fight, a stray bullet struck Todd, causing chaos in the attic and sending all 3 fugitives crashing through the ceiling. The fugitives tie Dan and Lisa up in the basement and casually introduce themselves while eating sandwiches. Pete explains that they watched everything and now the couple is completely under their control. When Dan asks what they want, the group makes it clear that they need a large amount of money to start a new life. Dan offers the cash in his wallet, but Pete isn't interested in pocket change. Lisa then reveals that they are broke because Dan gambled away their savings, their car, and even their house. The couple immediately starts arguing, frustrating the fugitives. Allie then suggests a twisted game they used to play in prison whenever they got bored. To demonstrate, she tells Todd draw a circle on the floor and frees Dan from his restraints. Todd forces Dan into the circle, and the situation quickly becomes violent. Dan manages to fight back by punching Todd in his gunshot wound and escaping the circle, but Pete declares that leaving the circle means he is lost. Todd drags him toward the pool table and prepares to finish the game. However, Pete suddenly notices a movie poster on the wall and learns that Dan directed the film. To Dan's surprise, Pete is a huge fan and starts discussing the movie, even criticizing its ending. For a moment, Dan thinks he has won Pete over, but the fugitives soon decide to kill him anyway. Just before Todd pulls the trigger, Lisa saves Dan by claiming she has $50,000 hidden away. She promises to take them to the bank the next morning and hand over the money. Wanting the cash, the fugitives agree to wait. That night, while tied up in the basement, Lisa reflects on how their marriage collapsed. She admits that she never truly cared about Doreo and only had the affair to see whether Dan still cared enough to fight for her. Believing they are both going to die, she apologizes for everything. As the fugitives argue upstairs about their escape plans, Dan spots a pool ball and quietly comes up with an idea. Dan begins yelling from the basement when he needs to use the bathroom. Todd says that if he tries anything, he will kill him. Todd frees Dan and takes him to the washroom, keeps watch. While Dan is in the bathroom, Todd begins acting creepily around Lisa. At the same time, Dan hides the pool ball inside a sock, turning it into a makeshift weapon. When he gets the opportunity, he swings the weighted sock and knocks Todd unconscious. Dan drops Todd's knife beside Lisa before sneaking upstairs alone. Lisa quickly uses the knife to cut herself free from the ropes. Upstairs, Peter starts calling for Todd. When there's no response, Peter heads downstairs and manages to wake him back up. They don't notice Lisa has escaped. They immediately begin searching for them. Lisa sneaks outside and hides near a car, hoping to find the keys and escape. Unfortunately, the keys are missing, forcing her to return to the cabin. At the same time, Todd's flashlight suddenly dies. He walks back the cabin and unexpectedly runs straight into Lisa. Lisa finally finds the keys, but Todd catches her at gunpoint. He orders her to drop the knife. Desperate to survive, Lisa suddenly claims that she is pregnant. She says the baby belongs to the man she had an affair with and begs Todd not to kill her child. Dan rushes in and smashes a trophy into Todd's back. To his shock, the massive convict barely reacts. Todd turns around and brutally attacks both Dan and Lisa. The couple is completely overpowered. Lisa manages to knock him down briefly. Todd grabs Lisa and violently throws her across a table before wrapping a wire around her throat and beginning to strangle her. Dan finally recovers and lunges toward the shotgun, but he slits before reaching it. Todd immediately turns his attention toward Dan and starts brutally beating him. In desperation, she grabs an entire knife set and repeatedly stabs him with knife after knife. Despite the wounds, Todd keeps fighting as if nothing happened. As Todd closes in on Lisa for the final blow, Dan strikes him in the head with the trophy. This time the hit is enough to stop him. Dan grabs the gun and prepares to finish the job, but hearing Pete and Allie have returned to the cabin, Dan and Lisa hide together inside a wardrobe upstairs. Dan finally admits that Lisa was right. He stopped fighting for their marriage because he felt like a failure and eventually gave up. Believing Lisa is pregnant, tells her to escape and save the baby.
Lisa then reveals the truth. She isn't pregnant at all. The story was nothing more than a lie she made up to distract Todd and buy them time.
He tells her it was the best acting performance he has ever seen from her. Their moment is cut short when Pete discovers them hiding in a wardrobe. Dan tackles him, giving Lisa a chance to escape, but the fugitives quickly catch up. Outside, Lisa almost gets away, but Allie catches her and knocks her to the ground with a gun. Dan attacks Allie from behind, but Pete suddenly crashes through a window and launches himself at Dan. He brutally beats Dan and pins him down. Lisa tries to help by stabbing Pete with a rake, but the situation only gets worse. When Todd suddenly reappears alive despite all his injuries, Todd holds Lisa hostage as Pete drags Dan toward a running lawnmower, eager to kill him in a gruesome new way. During the struggle, Dan even loses a finger. Just as Pete is about to finish him off, a sports car crashes into Pete. The driver is Michael, who had rushed to the cabin after receiving a warning call about suspicious activity there. He escaped from a care facility, stole a car, and came to save them. A violent shootout follows. Michael kills Todd. Allie then stabs Michael from behind, but he shoots her in the leg. Pete attacks Michael, but Michael fights back viciously, even biting part of Pete's nose off. Although Michael is badly beaten, he tells Dan and Lisa to run, and they jump into the sports car, but engine suddenly died at same moments. Pete drags Michael to the lawnmower and kill him badly. As car gets start couple speeds away, while Pete fires after them. A bullet strikes the vehicle, causing it to crash into a tree. When Dan wakes up, he finds Lisa alive, but missing a chunk of her hair. Despite everything they've been through, he gently reassures her that she still looks beautiful. Dan tells Lisa to take the boat keys and escape while he deals with them. Meanwhile, Pete cruelly dumps Allie, admitting he only used her to escape prison. Pete goes to the car, but it's empty as Lisa has already made her way to the dock. In the cabin, Allie treats her gunshot wound with alcohol, but Dan finds her first. When she tries begging and threatening him, Dan shoots her, ending the threat for good. At the dock, Lisa struggles to start the boat. By the time she gets it running, Pete has already arrived. Dan races after them, grabs the boat's rope, and pulls himself aboard. Pete demands the money and threatens Lisa, but she keeps talking to distract him until Dan attacks from behind. A brutal final fight breaks out on the boat. Pete is still incredibly strong and nearly overpowers both of them. While Dan keeps him busy, Lisa slips a bag filled with rocks around Pete's neck, stabs his leg with the anchor, and pushes him into the lake. Pete briefly resurfaces, but eventually sinks and drowns under the weight. However, the anchor rope becomes tangled around Dan's legs and drags him into the water as well. Lisa desperately struggles to pull him back aboard. Even when Dan tells her to let him go, she refuses and finally manages to save him. The two embrace, realizing they still care deeply for each other despite everything that happened. Later, sitting together by the dock, they return to joking with one another. Lisa even hands Dan back the finger he lost during the fight. Both apologize for trying to kill each other, and Lisa promises she has a plan to deal with their financial problems. When the police arrive, The couple invents a story about their cabin being invaded by dangerous criminals and how they work together to survive. The tale becomes a media sensation, turning them into heroes overnight.
Their story is eventually adapted into a movie. Dan is hired to direct it, while Lisa is cast in a leading role, finally giving them the chance to work together. By the end, the couple has rebuilt their relationship and found their way back to each other after surviving a completely insane series of events.